It's Thursday, August 20th, 2020, and today's Daily Detroit is in 3 parts.
Part number 1, we'll take a peek at the coronavirus situation around the state and this here region.
Part number 2, there has been a landmark preliminary settlement announced around the Flint Water Crisis. What is it? What does it mean? And, well, what's next?
And the last part is Tom Lawrence from Lawrence Systems, Daily Detroit's resident IT guru. He talks to Jer all about Albion College's plan to come back to school using a tracking app that looks like it has some serious security flaws. Can technology help us get back closer to normal?
But first, remember to become a member on Patreon at patreon.com/dailydetroit. Just a few bucks a month goes a long way to help keep Daily Detroit coming to your ears each and every weekday.
And if you've got feedback for the show or just a question, hit us up on our voicemail at 313-789-3211. That's 313-789-3211. Operators are standing by. Not really.
Poor engineer Randy. He's in a closet all by himself.
Okay, but I could set the building on fire.
I'm Jer Stays.
And I'm Sven Gustafson. Let's do it to it.
419 new confirmed COVID-19 cases were reported Thursday, with 19 additional deaths. A number of those were due to a records review. This brings the statewide pandemic total to just under 94,700 cases and 6,368 deaths. The state has a transmission rate of 1.02, so the virus is still spreading, and Michigan is in the top 15 states in the country in that, not so great distinction.
Meanwhile, Washtenaw County has a new health order out for Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti, banning gatherings of more than 25 people at outdoor events. That's key because both cities, of course, are home to colleges, being the University of Michigan and Eastern Michigan University. The order took effect Thursday at 5 p.m. It remains in effect until otherwise stated. The Washtenaw County Health Department is trying to get ahead of an expected crush of students in the college towns, which most experts agree will result in additional outbreaks. As we mentioned on yesterday's show, Michigan State University has opted to go 100% remote for its undergraduate education starting this fall, and there's mounting pressure on other state universities to follow suit. Wayne State announced they were going remote months ago, a decision decried by many people at the time.
On Thursday, Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel announced a $600 million deal to settle civil lawsuits against the state over the Flint Water Crisis. It's believed to be the largest settlement in Michigan state government history. The deal, which still needs formal court approval, follows more than 18 months of negotiations over how to bring closure to class action litigation that joined more than 100 individual lawsuits. The settlement would cover the state, the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, and all individual state defendants, including former Governor Rick Snyder, who was in office at the time of the lead contamination crisis. About 80% of the money would be spent on claims of children who were under the age of 18 when the state first switched Flint's drinking water source in 2014, and most of it on those who were age 6 or younger. That's a reflection of the dangers of lead to the brain development of young children. Around $12 million would fund special education programs for children who have suffered long-term health and behavioral effects of lead poisoning.
The drinking water crisis began in 2014 when Flint was under the jurisdiction of a state-ordered emergency financial manager who switched the drinking water supply for Flint from the Detroit water system to the Flint River as a way to save money. The state has since acknowledged that it failed to require corrosion control chemicals be added to the Flint River water, which ended up leaching lead from underground pipes. It's expected to take up to 45 days for a formal approval of the settlement. If approved, it would mean the state has spent more than $1 billion to address the lead contamination crisis in Flint, including nearly $100 million to replace all of the city's lead service lines. The settlement doesn't cover ongoing criminal lawsuits against the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and 2 engineering firms that worked on the water switch. In a statement, Nessel said resolving the outstanding legal issues has been a top priority since she took office back in 2019. She added that drawing out the legal wrangling, quote, would have achieved nothing but continued hardship on Flint residents. Here's part of what Governor Gretchen Whitmer had to say in a recorded statement.
We reached this settlement because further delays were unacceptable, and I want to acknowledge that Flint residents have been beyond patient. We recognize that the settlement may not completely provide all that Flint needs. We hear and respect those voices and understand that healing Flint will take a long time.
All right, Sven, let's talk about this a little bit because I think there's some interesting things to pull out. First off, if you look on social media, there are a lot of calls for former Governor Rick Snyder's head on this Flint issue. And with this, it looks like that is not going to happen. I mean, it was something that Attorney General Dana Nessel kind of halted when she took office, kind of took a new tact. But it seems like this really kind of would sew all of that up.
Yes, technically, Nessel said that she was throwing out all the criminal complaints for now, reserving the right to pick them up later. But look, the state had to do something here, clearly. They couldn't let this rage on, both for the people of Flint and also for the state of Michigan's own balance sheet, right? I mean, the longer this goes on, the more likely that it's going to really cost them, even a lot more than $600 million, which I know sounds like a lot of money. But, there are also complaints, and I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more, that $600 million is like a drop in the bucket. If you do the math, about 100,000 people resided in Flint at the time of the water crisis. So that adds up to something like $6,000 per resident. And that does not even take into account lawyers' fees. So the amount is likely to be a lot smaller than that. That's also, of course, if all 100,000 residents file claims, which is probably realistically unlikely. There is a website where people can file claims. We will put a link to that in the show notes. But I mean, clearly they had to do something. This all started and occurred basically under the previous administration, and any administration worth its salt is going to want to kind of wrap this up and move on. But it's an important step in the healing for the city of Flint, but it's certainly it doesn't close out this painful chapter in the city's history. I mean, this was just a staggering failure of government leadership. I mean, people's lives. I mean, children's lives and futures were just forever altered by this decision, which was all about money and, all done on a financial spreadsheet, essentially.
I feel like there's a lot of ticking time bombs underneath the streets and above our heads when it comes to Michigan's infrastructure and this is not to absolve the decisions in how it was handled after it happened or the decisions to make it, but like there's a bunch of stuff in this state that's just not taken care of. I mean, think about those dams that happened and that giant flood up in mid-Michigan. I mean, there's a bunch of these and we don't think about them because we're living our day to day, but Michigan does not have a good record, whether it's public or private, of taking care of our infrastructure.
Well, and speaking of dams, we still haven't fixed the damn roads either.
Joining me from his remote lair somewhere in Metro Detroit, Tom Lawrence, Lawrence Systems, also YouTuber, all the things. Welcome back to Daily Detroit, sir.
Welcome. I'm excited to be here. Let's talk about some contact tracing.
Right? Let's get nerdy. So here's an interesting story that I think we both wanted to talk about. It's in TechCrunch. It's about Albion College, and that's a small art school in Michigan. And the big thing about this is that it's going to allow its nearly 1,500 students to return to campus, but they're pinning their hopes on an app to do contact tracing called Aura. I know that there's just been a lot of conversation about how to deal with COVID-19. Some smaller nations have actually used apps to connect with their residents about like quarantining, that kind of stuff. What is happening here and what are some of the concerns?
So the one thing I will admit from the true nature of these, if you do them right, big if here, you can make them anonymous. there is a ability for technology to solve some of these problems. You can borrow from some of the very complex implementations in mathematics that we have really done a great job of solving for how to do an entirely anonymous system where we can say this person was in contact with this person without violating image privacy. That is a true part. And that's how all these problems start. We start with something we know, and then we pivot and say, so it's a solution, right? And tech people are like, hey, if there's money involved, we can probably build an app that'll do all this because we know we've solved it based on, other pieces of technology that can do this. So this will be a perfect fit for this problem. And the tech industry, they're always here to help solve a problem, right? They have the solution for us, even when it may not work, because anyone who understands the other implications, the other factors, the variables you're not considering, then you start realizing how difficult of a problem this is. And while I would love, and as a longtime technology advocate, to solve many problems, there are things that aren't as easily solved as we'd like to believe.
One of the things I've noticed over the years, especially with the rise of big tech, is that there's this idea that technology can solve the problems that humans create. But I find that in general, human beings are basically randomness generators.
Yes.
That do what they want to do, and often the technological solution goes on what's logical, but not on how humans actually respond to things.
Well, it's often written by very logical humans. So we have people who understand how to write code. They follow things in a very predefined logical way. Therefore, they assume others will also do this. And my favorite piece of technology that shows the illogical nature of humans is watching any of the fail videos online. So YouTube definitely started as a great platform for one thing, but it turns out some of those popular videos are where people do things that you go, why would they do that? But I'm going to watch them do it. So there is enough knowledge out there that humans will behave extremely random.
Well, let's get to this Aura app at Albion College. This is something that is designed to track students' real-time locations. And a big key about this is that there is no way to opt out. If you're a student at Albion, you basically have to have this app on your phone that is tracking you wherever you go. In the time of a pandemic, is that necessarily a bad thing?
So in concept, like I said, technology thinks they can solve the problem by making this work. The reality is a much more complicated one. And there's actually two problems. The first problem directly with the app used was they dove into a little bit, and it turns out it was not as securely coded as it should have been. They were actually able to do some classic, what they refer to as an enumeration attack. So they stored all the data, and they were able to reverse engineer the way that data was stored using some basic security tools to reverse engineer the app. And they were able to expose about 15,000 different QR codes, because they use kind of a QR code system to say whether or not you are allowed to come into class, or maybe you've been exposed and the QR code changes to say you're not allowed to come to class. And because it was not coded, there's the first problem. It wasn't written well. People were able to reverse engineer exposing students' personal information, which of course is going to fall under the HIPAA laws. So we have now violated people's privacy with this, and it was all because the app wasn't coded right. The second, more technological problem, and this is the overall problem with these contact tracing apps, is it's a classic identification problem. The efficacy depends on two things: false positives and false negatives. I'll give you a little example here. False positives. Any app is going to have a precise definition of what a contact is. Let's say that's more than 6 feet away or closer than 6 feet for more than 10 minutes. These can produce a lot of false positives because we don't have a virus that has a 100% transmission rate. So where do we set that? What are we going to base it on? The GPS location of two students in this app, the Bluetooth IDs of these students. So Bluetooth is another unique identifier. We know Bluetooth has a short proximity. But what if there's a wall between those people? What if each of them sat on a wall so they don't have any air contact, but they somehow were in proximity to each other for maybe 2 hours while they sat on adjacent walls that had separate ventilation systems? That would give a false positive. Second problem, false negatives. The rate the app fails to register a contact when infection occurs. This will also be a big problem. One of the errors, the app's location and proximity, the two transmissions that occur from people that don't have the app, and this is where you do have sometimes people are going to be in contact where they don't have the app. Now you have that problem. Either way, the result's the same. We end up with not good data, bad data in, bad data out. Also, we do know people are quite glued to their phones. The one thing I didn't see as a solution is, one, I can spoof the GPS on my phone. That's actually not too hard to do. Two, I can have more than one phone. it's 2020. I can go get a phone if I needed a phone, or I can just leave it at school. I can wander off. And this app bases on the assumption that no one leaves your phone. Matter of fact, why don't I just buy a second cheap phone and take it to school, register it, leave it in my dorm all the time while I go out and do whatever? Because, kids have never left the dorm at night unsupervised, right?
Never. Those things never happen. A third thing that I look at, and this is really great reporting by Zach Whitaker at TechCrunch, is that this app was developed by a company that was founded this year with no history, apparently, in developing apps beyond, and that really makes me nervous. And as a journalist, I look at it and go, is this another time where a really good salesperson made a really good pitch and people bought into it, but we don't really know all of the stuff underneath it? Because I see this a lot with contracts. There's a problem that comes up. Companies get created almost overnight to deal with this. And it's not clear, do the founders have, it's one thing to start a company, but also do the founders have experience with it? But it was a group called Nucleus Careers, which is actually a recruiting firm, not a development firm.
Yeah. And one of the things that we've realized, and we're seeing this more and more all the time, app development is getting in some ways more challenging because of the security problems that can come with it. And the lowest bidder is not necessarily the person that's going to do the best coding on this. So a lot of these apps, especially if they were rushed to market, they're more likely to have code flaws. The amount of code and the way they pull libraries together is a complex task. Not that it can't be done, but it does require careful planning. So hurry up and grab these people and produce an app that solves the problem, that wins the bid, does not always equate to being the most secure app. It needs to be gone through. And this is a challenge we have in the market in overall for technology, is having your app thoroughly tested by a third-party audit firm, which this app would have not have survived a test by a third-party audit firm. And it's almost something I think should have been done before you present this app. Where's your third-party firm that tested this app for its security? Because they basically, with very little amount of research over at TechCrunch, they highlighted how easy they were just to go through and enumerate all the names. That is one of the first things you test as a security engineer when you're testing an app. Can I just increment the numbers assigned to people and give me the other people's names? Well, we failed right there. And that's essentially the short answer of how they got in there. And that's really a big problem.
So I know a lot of people are looking for solutions around this. We had Dr. Paul Thomas on yesterday talking about the remote instruction at MSU and the possibilities that there's going to be more colleges that end up having to go down this route. From a technology perspective, is this app thing a way to go, or are we really looking at remote schooling? What are your thoughts on that? And are there technological solutions to help us deal with this pandemic and try to get back to normal?
It is simple as it sounds, and this is, a little before the show, we started a little discussion on this, that this problem was somewhat solved like Japan and many other developed nations, Japan being an easy one to highlight because you can research this. They've been wearing masks since the 1918 flu pandemic. It is part of their culture to say, this is generally, if you're sick, you're not feeling well, you're having symptoms, you put a mask on, no big deal. As simple as that sounds, and as much as I would love to tell you technology is the solver of everything, from a more programmatic standpoint, it's actually kind of a simple one. Wearing a mask at least deflects the virus, because people always like to make the argument, why are we trying to quarantine the healthy people? Well, it's because we can't identify the sick people, but an app isn't going to solve that. But in other areas, we've watched this. Plenty of evidence, plenty of very detailed evidence in all the other developed nations that it is simple as wearing a mask can really reduce the effects overall. Back to the schooling. I think remote schooling is something that is going to be challenging because it's not a dynamic we're used to, but I think it's a very solvable problem. I think this is something that we can shift to. We're already seeing a lot of people, and of course myself included, because I hang out with a lot of other tech people, we learn from a lot of online type of learning. My son does this as well, not because I'm his dad and I'm a tech person, but because him and his friends, they've picked up how to do things in Minecraft. They didn't go to school for Minecraft, but I watch him build incredible things. They learn by all these online interactions. It's gotten easier for people to connect online, to group interact with each other online. And I think these are some ways that until we can get a bigger biological solution, it's still technology, but a biotech solution that would inoculate us against this virus, that these are some of the ways that we can help mitigate this. And I've seen people making the debate that this creates a bigger digital divide for those who don't have technology. technology. But I can tell you, if we can figure out ways to put technology in the hands of those who maybe live in a more impoverished area and don't have access to computers, figuring out ways to get them technology, because laptops and internet is relatively inexpensive, is still less than trying to figure out how to put a bunch of kids that touch everything, as we all know.
Well, I mean, you are a parent.
Yeah, I'm a parent. I know these kids are sticky. They touch everything. Putting a bunch of kids in the classroom is going to be more of a challenge than it is to hand out some laptops in areas through grants and things like that. There's other solutions I think we need to explore in the short term until we can come up with a biological solution for the long term.
Well, and it gets to this idea of how much of this is exposing problems that were there anyway. I mean, I live in the city of Detroit. I believe the latest number, I mean, it shifts, but it's somewhere around 40% of residents do not have access to broadband even on their smartphone. And one of the concerns about the ongoing debate about Detroit schools going back into session is the fact that these schools, not only they provide stability, they also end up providing a lot of meals, things like that to a lot of kids. And it makes one ask, like, if we're leaning on the schools for all of this stuff, what about the fundamental underlying system is broken that this is just exposing?
Yes. And I think that's what this is really highlighting, is other, cracks in the system, if you will, which goes on to the other thing that's very complex. Governing people, managing it is not a simple task. Everyone likes to think a hashtag will solve it one way or the other, but it's a lot more complicated than that. Actually getting the resources to the people that need it is a very complex task. And that's why I work in tech, not governance. My desire is to fix it, and I would like to put a Band-Aid on it for sure. But I know that it's very complex. I've worked in some of the city politics, even locally, trying to get something done. And you realize bureaucracy creates some very difficult challenges. And then people, back to our earlier talk about people being random, people inherently will work against their own self-interest sometimes at their own detriment. So that also adds another factor in there of, we want to provide this for you, and people then rejecting said service. These are not easy to implement. So that's definitely a long-term goal. And if you look at the overarching reach of humanity, we are improving when you look at things on a long-term scale. But when you look at short-term things, 2020 really highlighted it. We have some serious issues.
Well, Tom Lawrence, Lawrence Systems, you're on YouTube, on the internet. I'll link to all of these things. Thank you so much for your time today. It was great chatting with you.
It is greatly appreciated. Thank you for having me.
And we are done for today. Two quick things. A review on Apple Podcasts would be ever so awesome. It helps people when they see our listing to know more about the show. It would be greatly appreciated.
And of course, once again, if you have feedback, hit us up on our new voicemail line, 313-789-3211. We always want to hear from you and what you have to say.
With that, I'm Jer Stays.
And I'm Sven Gustafson. Take care of each other, and we'll get through this whole weird thing together.